When I was 29, turning 30, it felt strange in a way that I didn't expect. Not because anything dramatic happened, but because the story I had already attached to it before turning 30 arrived. I remember hearing people talk about how your 20s are typically the golden years, your years of thriving, where your body feels invisible, your mind is sharp, and your energy is endless. And somewhere along the way, I started to absorb the idea that turning 30 meant slowing down. I remember vividly even Biggie's favorite verse, birthdays are my worst days. Now started echoing in my head a bit differently. Not as a lyric anymore, but as a belief. And for a moment, I actually started treating beliefs like facts. And you see, the thing about belief systems is they usually creep up on you and start quietly shaping the way you experience yourself. For me, the instant change was I started noticing back pain that I didn't have in my 20s, and immediately I attached it to age. I remember trying to create a habit of reading where I wanted to read 30 minutes a day. And I would struggle to focus on a page for more than a few minutes. And suddenly it became evidence that something about me was slipping, and it's that big 3-0. And for a moment, just a moment, I started carrying those limitations in other areas of my life. I started be I started moving differently because I was of the assumption that I was on the decline. But nothing fundamentally different had changed about me. I was just in my head thinking that the end of the world was here. But something very interesting happened. There was a period after I turned 30, call it the birthday lock in or the post birthday lock in, where you just turn a new age and you have all these goals and visions, and you'll be getting in a zone. There was a stretch of weeks where I started sleeping properly again. I started training consistently and I started paying attention to my body instead of fighting against it. And out of nowhere, I realized, damn, I'm hitting new PRs at the gym. My energy improved, my focus improved. Even the way I thought about myself just started feeling like it was heading in a different direction. And that's where I realized something uncomfortable. A lot of these limitations that I had started placing on myself weren't facts. They were beliefs I had inherited and unconsciously started accepting them as truths. That realization changed the way I think about belief systems entirely. Because facts and beliefs are not the same thing. Fact has a basis of truth to it. A belief system, on the other hand, behaves more like software. Belief systems typically become the operating system through which you start to experience life. And one thing about an operating system, shout out to my Apple fans, is you can always update the OS. And this made me think about how we underestimate how much the stories we repeat internally shape our reality externally. And this is not in a motivational, manifest your dream life kind of way. I mean this in a more practical way, in a more human way. Because many times when we face challenges that we fail in the process, we stop showing up fully. We start to frame the challenge as evidence of not being capable. But in another world, there's a way that we can frame difficulty as part of the process of growth. The reason I bring that reframe is because your relationship to effort usually shifts completely. So the task may remain uncomfortable, but the meaning attached to it usually shifts. I say this because when I started getting back into reading recently, I noticed there was a version of me that would say, I hate this. My attention span is cooked. And then I caught myself, and there was a version of me that came back into reading by saying, this is the process of rebuilding focus. Same book, same difficulty, different belief system. One created resistance, the other one created engagement. I think this is what liberating belief systems actually are. So on one hand, you have limiting belief systems, and the other hand, you have liberating belief systems. And I don't see them as affirmations or pretending that everything is positive, but more like becoming aware that the interpretations you've subconsciously or unconsciously accepted for years about yourself are not fixed. Because over time, many of us become loyal to identities we never actually consciously chose. We start labeling ourselves as the person who isn't disciplined, the person who isn't motivated, the person who always procrastinates, the person who used to have potential, the person who is getting older now. But I realized awareness But I realized sometimes growth starts with challenging the beliefs you've mistaken for truth. And transformation begins with something less dramatic than reinvention. It may begin with choosing a different interpretation. And I say that because the quality of your life starts reflecting the quality of the story you keep rehearsing internally. So if you constantly say, I'm falling behind, you can reframe that to, I'm learning how to sustain myself better. I'm too old for this can be, I'm finally becoming aware to do this one thing differently. In the end, none of this happens automatically. Awareness can open the door, but you still have to decide to walk through it. You still have to show up. And maybe that's the real work, not becoming perfect, just becoming conscious enough to challenge the beliefs you've mistaken for facts. So this week, I wanted us to sit with this concept because it's important to be kind to yourself. You need to embrace grace over perfection. A lot of these things are deeply ingrained in our systems, and those tiny shifts require a lot of grace on how we show up. The direction you take once you become aware is not going to shift your life tomorrow, but repeated compounding decisions on the same OS to update it begins to open a possibility of a life that you've never experienced before. And the fundamental truth is you can't change a system you don't realize is running. So I wanted to challenge you this week to ask yourself this question. What belief about yourself have you repeated so many times that it now feels like a fact? And who would you become if you stopped treating it that way? This was your weekly reset. I hope we can all read, reflect, and rise. Don't forget to share, subscribe, comment, and I'll see you guys in the next one.